This program is brought to you by Pussy Magnets.
Put a midge on your friend with a pussy magnet.
Welcome, my lovely lumps. Or should I say lovely labs? I'm so thrilled to have you here in the Labia Lounge. We're going to yarn about all things sexuality, womanhood, relationships, intimacy, holistic health, and everything in between. Your legs. Ooh, can't help myself. Anyway, we're going to have vag loads of real chats with real people about real shit. So buckle up, you're about to receive the sex ed that you never had and have a bloody good laugh while you're at it. Before we dive in, I'd like to respectfully acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which I'm recording this, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. It's an absolute privilege to be living and creating dope podcast content in Naarm, and I pay respect to their elders past, present, and emerging. Now, if you're ready, let's flap and do this. Oh my God, is there such thing as too many vagina jokes in the one intro? Whatever, it's my podcast. I'm leaving it in.
Don't panic, you're not broken. Your sex education was a piece of shit. Get your flaps out and pull up a couch. It's the Labia Lounge.
Hey gang, just before we jump into this episode, I wanted to offer you an opportunity to access my new mini course for free before I start charging for it in future. It's for people with vulvas and it's quick to complete. It's all about demystifying the female body and pleasure anatomy and getting some basic fundamentals to understand your body better. It's called Pussy Pleasure Secrets, Your Roadmap to Bedroom Bliss. You can grab it on the freebies page of my website or in the show notes. It's a great little free resource to kind of dip your toe in or act as a bit of a taster for my work. So if you've ever been curious about this sort of thing and you just don't know where to start, or you want a really quick, easy, accessible, non-threatening way to get the ball rolling and start working on this stuff, this is a great place to start. Hey, my beautiful labial legends. Today we are going to be chatting about what to do in a long-term relationship where there's a gap between libido or desire. And I know I've already done a really incredible episode about desire discrepancy with Jessa Zimmerman that you should definitely check out if you haven't already. And I've covered libido as well with a female libido specialist, Elena Rossi, in the past. But since it is such a common challenge that couples experience, I thought it couldn't hurt to interview an actual married couple who work with people around this specifically. So today I have the pleasure of talking to Tara and EJ Kerwin. And they're going to provide some really practical and easily applicable strategies, tips, and insights about how to navigate having lower desire or higher desire in your relationship. And to give you a rundown on these two, Tara is a licensed marriage and family therapist, and EJ is a licensed professional counsellor. They're a married couple who co-founded the Relationship Renovation Counselling Centre and co-host the top 1.5% ranked Relationship Renovation podcast to help couples suffer less and love more. Welcome, you two.
Thank you. I love that introduction. It just reminds me of why we even got started it in the first place was around like this topic and just struggling. So it's just, I love being here. It's such important work. I love the work you're doing. So we're just very happy to be here.
Oh, thanks, babe. Oh, yeah, it's a big, big topic, and it's probably one of the most, if not the most common thing that people seek support for in couples therapy and counseling. And, you know, when people inquire about working with me, that's often a big thing that they want to tackle. You know, managing the dynamics between higher desire and lower desire, you know, in a relationship is just a really important skill to have some understanding around, I think, because it's not even just common, but it's actually just a complete inevitability. It's a natural part of long-term relationships. If you stay in a relationship long enough, you will have to navigate this. Like there's no two ways about it. At some point there will be, you know, fluctuating levels of desire. You're not always going to line up at the same time and always want the exact same thing and amount of sex and type of sex. And, you know, so it's not just common, but it's inevitable, right? In long-term relationships.
100%. Yeah.
It's inevitable and it changes as we transition and go through different developmental milestones as well in our relationship and just as individuals. And the thing that I don't think people understand is like that both people, whether it's low desire or high desire, suffer greatly.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they don't talk about it. So then it's this, I'm in this alone, not talking about it, suffering. And then we get the wrong messages. Like, because EJ and I had a whole podcast where we shared our own vulnerable feelings around the high desire, low desire. Like, he felt like I didn't want him anymore. And that at all was not I was just feeling so like in my body different, but we didn't talk about it. And so like both partners receive these messages that aren't true, but we're not talking about it. So the stories in our minds are just like so strong. And that's, 80% of the couples we see at our counseling center or that we're coaching online, they don't talk about it, but it's happening. Both people feel really alone in it. And they both want the same thing. They want to feel connected. They just don't know how to go about it. And so that's where we just felt compelled to do our own work and then to help support couples in doing it. Because there's not like this magic answer, but there's steps and there's skills involved to at least get it out there.
Well, and I think you're in such different positions. It's so uniquely, uncomfortable to be on both sides of it. And both people, I think, feel just as disempowered, but somehow you sort of feel like the other person is in a better position.
Yeah.
Like I know for sure that Tara felt that it was better for me. I still had my sex drive. Like I still felt in touch. Like, wow, what a great thing for me.
Must be nice, buddy.
And I felt like, well, you have all the freaking control. Like you're the one, you're what felt to me like you're the gatekeeper, and so it makes it feel like it's an intractable problem. And plus, because, we're going to talk about tools and ways to get there, but because there's no short-term fix to it, you just really avoid dealing with it because you're like, well, why the hell do I want to talk about this? Let's just like freaking have a couple drinks in the backyard and like enjoy the aspects of our life that we do enjoy and just like, sort of bury the fact that there's one area of our life that we're both really dissatisfied with.
So there's a resignation, we call it. And then people, right, resigning. Now we're just like victims of our own livelihood. And that feels awful.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really disempowering and can feel a bit hopeless. You can feel very stuck and very confused and clueless about how to get yourself out of that rut, how to move forward, how to change things when it's just slowly but surely kind of declined to this place. And, sex is just something that a lot of people struggle to communicate about in general. And then you look at communication in relationships, is often something that needs a bit of work. So it's a really tough area. And so many couples, experience these mismatched levels of desire at different times. It sort of ebbs and flows and your roles can swap throughout the relationship. There can be huge life changes like death in the family or like birth or becoming a parent or chronic illness. I did a podcast with a woman called Tara Galliano about cancer and surviving cancer and how that impacts, your libido. And so it's so common that there are these separate experiences happening in the one relationship. We're feeling completely alone. We're making these assumptions, usually pretty incorrect assumptions about the other's experience and what is behind that. Like you were sort of talking about the higher desire partner might feel rejected or believe that the other partner is no longer attracted to them or doesn't want them. They might make it mean something about them. And then the lower desire partner is often experiencing a lot of guilt or shame or feeling obligation or pressure. Or grief and confusion around the loss of this physical desire that was there in the beginning. And then we can make these, connect the dots around what that means about the relationship and the health of the relationship. And I think there's so much disconnect, leading to this very silent suffering on both sides. And I would love to hear from you, like what some of the common incorrect assumptions that each partner makes about the other are when there's a desire discrepancy, and how those assumptions can kind of wind up making each partner feel.
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the primary like agitators in doing what is most important in this process is that you just have to find a way to stay connected in the fact that there's a significant discrepancy between your sexual desires, and that you know, that's almost, if you can't get to that, how in the world are you going to ever get back to connecting, you know, physically, sexually again? And I think, you know, one of the really poisonous ideas is that the other person, there's something they could do that would be really easy that would just make this easier on you. You know, and I think like sometimes on the side of the low desire person, I think there's like, well, if you would just accept that this is the way it is. You know, I know Tara had a couple phrases that she would say to me. If you would just accept that this is the way it is, then it would be okay, because then I wouldn't feel judged, and I wouldn't feel like I'm something other than what you want me to be. And then on the high desire side, and my side, oftentimes it was like, well, aren't there things you could be doing? Like, couldn't you be going to a doctor, or couldn't you just do this, or couldn't you just like remember how it used to be? And I think like you really start to think that the other person could just do some very simple things and it would just make it better. And what we found is it's not accurate.
Well, and my story, and I know that a lot of people I've worked with is like that maybe sex is more important than emotional connection. That like now I'm just like, oh, you just need to like have this, you know, outlet of energetic output so you can feel better. And it has like, that means that my emotions don't matter. It's like selfish. I viewed him, when it was the higher desire piece, because I think you're like, what are some of the assumptions? Like, what, he's just so selfish. Like that is just, can't he see how I'm suffering right now? Like all he thinks about is himself. Like, so we see that a lot. I mean, we will have couples like on the low desire side change like into their pajamas in closets and stuff. Cause it's like, oh no, if he even looks at my body, he will just want it. And it's just like, it's like, I don't want my body to like defend myself against my partner, but we start to do that because now it's a threat. If my partner looks at me or objectifies me like that, now I'm threatened. And so you can see how it can just start to spiral out of control into these faulty assumptions. And if you don't have that emotional safety built within your relationship, it's going to be really hard to talk about it because people are already mad, resentful, blamey. So it's like, how do you talk about something so vulnerable if you don't have the emotional safety piece there too?
Well, and then here's where it gets really complicated. We're actually about to have an episode that's dedicated to this topic. Is what you often hear from one member of the partnership is like, I need emotional safety. I need emotional connection in order to get me back or get me to a place of feeling physically connected. And so the individual who's on the side of being like, okay, well, I need to be more emotionally connected, more emotionally present, starts to look at it like it's almost like this sort of direct relationship where like, okay, well, if I build my emotional skills and then there's going to be some equivalent payback. And the reality is there's no direct relationship as far as like real, like seeing things change. Is that this could take a long time, you know, and that your emotional connection, you might have to just really focus on that and be really emotionally present and build that emotional connection and still not have your sexual connection change for maybe a bit. Because it is so complex, because it's not just that. I mean, I think therapists sometimes will really say like, oh, it's just that emotional connection. But what we discovered in working with people in our own relationship is there's oftentimes whole other things that start to appear is around past traumas coming around just the significant, central nervous system being fried out from motherhood, from work, from financial pressures. It's a cocktail. There's like all these things going on. It's not just one thing that's going to change things fundamentally.
Well, that and like when we first are starting to work with a couple, or we're like, oh, well, how, like, it seems like your sex life or your, physical intimacy, both of you are feeling very dissatisfied. Like, how do you guys talk about that? And they're like, well, we don't talk about it. Well, because where did we learn the skills to talk about sex, right? And so what we've also, like, what we explore with ourselves and with our couples is just like, what do you like? What do you like? Like, we were taught to either be shameful, to not have sex until we're in love. So sex is really bad unless you're in love. So now you have this idea of sex being like, oh, there's something wrong with it. Unless I'm in love with somebody, but how do you shift that in your mind when you grew up to fear it and don't do it unless you love? I mean, there's just so many stories we have that we grow up with around sex and our body and masturbation and we don't ever develop skills on how to talk about that, or even how do we, like, what do we like? Like, what's different? I remember watching Sex, Love, and Goop. Did you ever see that?
Yeah.
With good. And I was like, oh my God, I love that this is out here on Netflix. I don't know if it still is, but just like that, talking about how we don't talk about it and having certain sex experts on there working with couples on national TV, like putting it out there. Like what was it called? Not like the love languages, but the
Erotic. Yeah.
The erotic blueprints. I was like, oh we took the quiz. I had to.
Yeah. I've got an episode.
And I was like, yeah, oh, you do. This is awesome. So yeah, it was just introducing that, like, hey, it's okay that you guys haven't talked about it. Most of us haven't. And this is why you're here. And we're going to try to build emotional and physical safety around intimacy.
Hey, baby babes. Sorry to interrupt. I just had to pop my head into the lounge here and mention another virtual lounge that I'd love you to get around. It's the Labia Lounge Facebook group that I've created for listeners of the potty to mingle in. There you'll find extra bits and bobs like freebies, behind the scenes, or discounts for offerings from guests who have been interviewed on the podcast. There'll also be, hopefully, inspiring, thought-provoking conversations and support from a community of labial legends like yourself. My vision for this is that it becomes a really supportive, educational, and hilarious resource for you to have more access to me and a safe space to ask questions you can't ask anywhere else. So head over to the links in the show notes or look up the Labia Lounge group in Facebook, and I'll see you in there. And now, back to the episode.
A few other ones I have, right, with our couples or whatever, but it's just like that they're withholding sex for power.
Yeah.
Right? Which is then, I mean, we don't actually know. Humans really don't do that, but that assumption. So then you start to see that person as evil. Like we've had couples like they are just evil. They're withholding sex just to punish me. And it's like somehow this beautiful thing that makes us feel connected, physical intimacy, being the closest we can be to somebody, now becomes this huge black, angry, anxious cloud, and we're avoiding it like the plague. And so it is so important to be able to having the conversation about it. That builds confidence that, you know what, we can actually do this. And what you'll see, and I think you've already identified this word, but it is grief. Grief. Like when I used to be the high desire partner. I mean, I was a maniac. I mean, EJ could not keep up, right?
True.
And then I have twins and that had colic. I would go 5 days without sleeping, nursing every hour. I was like, don't look at me. Don't even don't touch my breast. And this is not happening. Like, and so in my mind, I'm overwhelmed and stop wanting these things from me. I'm already keeping these two humans alive. Stop wanting me. It was me, like, so sad that I lost that part of me. I've never been that overwhelmed in my whole life. And it literally like sucked up my sex drive like that. And I didn't know it was grief until we had to start doing our own work so we could help other couples around it. Until I was like, that's what it is. It's not about you, EJ. It's not about like, I'm actually envious that you have a sex drive now and I don't. Like, I'm grieving that I used to have this high frisky scale and I was like a little tigress. And now I'm like a freaking lump of coal and I feel like nothing. Like, and when I cry about it and EJ's like holding it and he's got space for it, now he's in it with me. We call it a shared emotional experience. But when I would just like not want it, I could feel his judgment. And then I felt even worse. And so it wasn't helpful. So even though that didn't change, it's not like my sex drive went through the roof after we talked about it, knowing that we could have the conversation and that he held it safely without judging it or taking it personally because he actually saw my suffering, that changed everything.
Well, and I think that one of the things that had to change, and I think it comes back to like the way, what people, the misconceptions is that it's going to some point go back to normal, what was normal,
Yes.
and
we want it the way it was. Yeah.
And that hasn't been our experience. Our experience is that things have changed and that we have to adapt to them. And that's just the nature of life, right? Is nothing ever becomes what it once was before. It just moves forward, it changes, it adapts. And so we've had to just do a ton of work around understanding our own personal reactivity and our negative core beliefs and our shitty communication with each other,
expectations,
and our expectations, and get into that. What Tara alluded to is instead of being in resignation of like, well, screw it, I guess I'm just, we'll have an unsatisfying sex life the rest of our lives, is that like we accept this is what it is right now. And accept that this is the love we have, and this is everything I adore about Tara, and this is the person I want to be with, even if things are different than maybe I would ultimately want them to be, and that has changed because it's not going to be that again,
Well, and I was going to say what changed too about the dynamic is that instead of like viewing EJ as like selfish and just trying to get his sexual needs met, I'm like, God, what's it like for you to be with me now? And like, I have like nothing to give to you physically, like most of the time. Like, what is that like for you? I'm sure he feels very lonely. So now I'm curious about his experience versus stop trying to be so selfish. Yeah. And and now like freaking menopause is coming on. Are you kidding me? Like, give me like 1 year. Like, I mean, at least right now I'm like in like, my cycle used to be every 24 days. Now it's like every 90 days. Now my body's going through this change. I'm like, come on. But now we have some tools. I mean, I cried right just over the weekend. Like, I just feel like a little dried up raisin now. Like, God dang it. Like, why is this happening? I'm so sad, EJ. I just want to feel like a little juicy person again. So, but we have the ability to talk about it and be in a place of acceptance. So I know that we'll get through this, and I'm going to go to a hormone specialist and she's going to get me back on track.
I love what you said about accepting where you are now, and also, really rather than just doing lip service to like, oh, we'll have we'll rebuild that sort of safety and emotional tenderness and then and put in a bit of effort towards that, and then instantly the sex is going to ramp back up again, and I'm kind of putting in that effort to get that result. Like it's not so much that as like rebuilding trust over time and like really putting the effort and the work into like relationship maintenance and like deepening trust, deepening, that connection and building a solid foundation where you're basically in constant partnership, navigating this together. And I think Emily Nagoski talks about this as a shared like I loved when you mentioned a shared emotional experience, because it's, you know, she talks about a shared thing as though it's a project that both of you are equally invested in, and you've got the two of you and you've got the relationship and you've got this separate entity, which is the kind of dynamic you have where you're both committed to putting in effort and being a nerd about it and being like, all right, well, what can we do? What are your ideas? What are my ideas? Should we do this? Should we try that? How did that go? And really like doing that work together as a shared experience and a shared project. And there was something else that, you know, you mentioned, Tara, around withholding to gain power or control. And that's almost never what's actually going on. But I think it's so damaging what we have in the media, where there's this really common trope, especially back in the 90s and noughties and earlier, I think. But it still happens where there's the naggy wife that, you know, is withholding sex as a way to get the upper hand. And it's, you know, a very like toxic kind of unhealthy way of looking at it, where like the lower libido partner, which in the media is always the woman, which is actually not true in real life. It's 50-50, depending, like gender doesn't actually, you know, weigh the scales heavily on one side. Yeah, it's like the woman in this dynamic is being the gatekeeper of sex, and she is, you know, using it as a reward. Like, if you do this, if you do some chores instead of weaponizing your incompetence, then maybe I'll give you a BJ, or like maybe you'll get lucky tonight if you know, take out the bins or whatever. And it's just, I hate that is such a common thing in the media, because that's not what we want to be doing.
No, it's
Yeah,
cringeworthy for sure.
and it's really like minimizing and invalidating the very real reasons that the lower libido partner might not be up for sex. You know, like there's some real stuff that you just touched upon with regards to becoming a mother and being touched out, and, you know, menopause, changes in your body and things like that, that are not trivial. They're massive and they're all consuming, and they're quite a big thing to navigate and overcome. And you need to do that as a team, rather than like one person seeing the other as this sort of like mean, nasty, controlling person that's withholding, you know? But before we get into some practical tips around what to actually do about this, I'd love to do the segment Get Pregnant and Die. So do you guys have a story about your sex ed for us? Or maybe it's even like an anecdote about like what your kids are learning in school in sex ed or something like that.
Don't have sex, because you will get pregnant and die.
Don't have sex in the missionary position. Don't have sex standing up. Just don't do it. Promise?
I mean, I can start off. Well, I could do. I was going to say, like, when I grew up Catholic, and so having like priests try to talk to you about sex was freaking creepy and horrible, and so that was it. But then so my parents are really wonderful people, and I love them very much. But like sex education was not a part of our existence. So I talked to my parents twice about like sex ish. And both times it happened when there was a power outage. So there was like nothing else, like the TV wasn't working, and it was like, oh, I guess we have a teenage son. We should probably talk to him about sex. And the first time my dad said, EJ, don't get a girl pregnant. Do a lot of feeling. I was like, I think I was like 12. Do a lot of feeling, like touch. Right. Don't put have sex, basically. It's safe to touch. Don't have sex.
Oh, okay.
And I was like, okay. Like, I have no idea what to do with that. And then the other time, the lights went out when I was 16, and he said, EJ. I said, yeah. He said, do you know what a condom is? I said, yeah. Okay. And that's it. Those are the only two times I've ever spoken about sex with my parents.
Oh my God. Wow.
That's all that, and like, and that, and creepy conversations with priests. Like that's it. That's it.
Wow.
Like,
Wow.
I was not very well equipped to
Mhm.
navigate a complex sexual relationship with my wife.
I would say for me, like, I mean, I remember just sex ed, and it was just like, here's the penis and here's the vagina, and everyone's laughing because you're like in 6th grade, and you're just like, oh my gosh, nothing stands out about that except for, you're just getting labels of stuff. And I would say that what I wish I could have learned is boundaries around what healthy touch is versus unhealthy touch. Like modeling in my home was very traumatic, right? A lot of abuse, a lot of physical and sexual abuse. So I didn't know. And I wish like in school, because if it's not safe at home, right? There's a reason I'm a therapist and I specialize in this. I wish someone would have talked about boundaries and safe touch and what if something's happening in the home? Like we just didn't have any of that education. And like when you're 12, 13, had someone said something, you could probably be like, oh, something's like not okay. So just that would be, I know that's not like it's like more like
No, it's
daunting
important stuff.
Yeah, but boundaries, right? And that's the biggest thing. Like, we'll get into it, but that we help couples with like safety containers and boundaries, because there's really they haven't discussed it before, and maybe things have felt intrusive or not talked about. And so we just help build safety containers to build the boundaries to help couples with, because sometimes they've never even talked about what their own beliefs around it are.
Yeah.
Mine were for sure like people just use me and use my body to get what they need. So when EJ was wanting that from me, it's exactly what I thought. Here's just another person that's going to hurt me, because I didn't know the extent of my trauma until you're in an overwhelming situation with twins and losing your sex drive. So
Yeah, absolutely. And that's another really toxic trope in media and fiction and stuff, is like, oh, men only want one thing and men are just going to use you for sex and like take their pleasure from your body. And yeah, it's really sad. But thanks for sharing, guys. So now, like, let's get into the nitty-gritty. It sort of sounds like, communication is one of the first steps and like a very key piece that is essential to making any of the other tips or strategies work. I imagine there's, like you were saying, creating that safe container, figuring out why you like, something that I'll talk to people about is like what you actually enjoy about sex and why you have sex. Cause sometimes there's an assumption that it's really just physical, but actually they're seeking connection and intimacy and safety and vulnerability and just pleasure. It doesn't have to be even sexual pleasure, but the oxytocin you get from like touching and cuddling and affection, so there's a lot of ways we can start to open up those channels of communication and help both parties understand where the other's coming from and what our needs are. But what are some of the like steps or the practical things that, you advise your couples to take to open up more meaningful conversations around, their desire, around the ways that they can build intimacy that are non-sexual, to deepen their connection, especially if, like you were saying, like a lot of people are really not used to talking about this stuff.
Yeah. I mean, we start off in our model, we have like a 3-part series on intimacy. And we start off with a section just called talking about sex.
Nice.
It's just like, it's like creating, it's a lot of what Tara's talking about with safety containers, of if we approach it from a safe enough distance, we can at least begin to build a context and an energy around speaking about it. Because if we go straight into like what we don't like about our current sex life, or get straight into what do you like, what do you not like, it can be a little shocking to the system, and most likely one person is not going to feel safe at all.
Yeah.
And so it's those real, very basic, very curiosity based questions, like, what did you, the same stuff we were just talking about, what did when's the first time somebody talked to you about sex? Like, what did you learn? You know, what were the values around sex in your household? What were the values around sex in your household? You know, it's just talking about some of this, the way you conceptualize sex, the way you conceptualize intimacy, how you learned about it. It's just, you know, it's kind of like putting your toe in, because also what you're going to, and then paying attention to the process versus the content.
Yes.
The content is, hey, we're starting to talk about how we learned about sex. The process is noticing in those initial conversations, what's it like? What happens? Am I comfortable? Am I uncomfortable? Is my partner making eye contact with me? Not making eye contact? You know, noticing what is it like to even go there with your partner? Because then that's what sometimes you need a therapist here, or a coach, or whatever. You need somebody to help you tweak that process, because when we first started talking about sex, Tara and I, it wasn't when everything was like honky dory. It was when there were problems, when there was that discrepancy. And honestly, it wasn't the first time we did it, wasn't when Tara had the lower sex drive. It was when I did very early on. And they weren't good conversations. They were, I can remember driving home from the airport and it being a really, like, I felt embarrassed and ashamed and judged, and Tara felt, I don't know what it looked like, angry and frustrated,
unwanted, whatever.
Yeah. And so that wasn't the right first conversation for us to have. You know, the first conversation should have been about, like, hey, what's it like to even talk about sex? Like, when you think about it, because that's the tweaking you have to do, get better, be more emotionally safe with one another, so that when the content gets complicated, you know, you have a good process you're running it through.
I love that. Yeah. A lot of the somatic work too, like where it's great when we're in session, because we can immediately, like, oh, I noticed, like, we're starting to talk about this, and oh, you just like crossed your arms, or I could feel some like cautiousness there, or your jaw just clenched. Because a lot of people, they're so automatic. You know, it's nice where we can point it out, but a big thing that we do is, like, when you start to recognize any tension in your body around physical intimacy, even emotional intimacy, you've got to talk about that with your partner. Otherwise, it's going to stay trapped in there. And then the next time happens, and then the next time happens, and now it's a pattern, and now it's in our neural network, right? We've created all of these little networks to do that. And so the moment you start to feel anxious, like, oh gosh, EJ, I just want to let you know, I can feel that your desire is really high right now. I'm starting to get anxious, because what I really want to do is just be able to, like, melt into you, but I'm absolutely exhausted. That it puts it out there. It's no longer stuck in our body. I'm not going to hold that anxiety for then that anxiety to go to a different story in my head that I suck because my desire is down right now, right? It's like the more you can just be organically sharing it, because you're recognizing it somatically and your partner can receive it, that's huge. Because once we get to that, because then, like, in our let's talk about sex 3 and 4, it's like we start to get playful. Like, what do you like during foreplay? Do you even like foreplay? What are your fantasies? And by this time, couples have built enough emotional safety and compassion for one another that they can start talking about things they've never talked about. I mean, I remember when we had one couple and they, you know, they wanted to, like, experiment with, like, you know, costume masks, like animal things. And, you know, they would never have done that had they a year before they came to see us. And now they're coming in like, yeah, like, I really wanted to be a donkey. And the partner didn't really like it, but my God, they were open to that fantasy. Like, okay, yes, she was able to put the donkey on her head. It didn't do it for me. I'm glad we could fulfill her fantasy though. Like, you know, it's like they got to that point because they were willing to take, here's the big piece, emotional risks and do the work. And if more people could do that, divorce rate, breakup rate would go significantly down. But we are instant gratification people. We do not want to like do all of the work. We want it handed to us. And so unfortunately, like you see this, you know, we get the couples in when it's like, okay, it's either this or divorce. It's like, oh, why? Like we're trying to do so much work out there to be like, don't wait for, you know, something huge to happen. Start doing these skills now. Like don't wait until a crisis happens.
Well, and speaking of skills, I think like, you know, some of these interventions and these awarenesses are 100% applicable when talking about sexual discrepancy and trouble within your sexual relationship, but they're also like very general things that work in any, you know, basically competing needs or times of conflict. And one of the biggest ones is knowing when you're out of your window of tolerance, you know, knowing when you are in an activated state, and from henceforth, I'm going to be working in my parasympathetic, you know, system. I'm going to be reacting. I'm going to be fighting. I'm going to be, I'm going to be freezing. I'm going to be fleeing. Is knowing, identifying as in as close proximity as possible. When is the moment that you just got triggered? You know, so a big thing between the two of us was Tara would be like, you know, look, we never talk about this until it's at a head or until there's like an intimate moment and then it goes sideways. So you need to get, you know, better at bringing this up. And so we're talking about it more. So then it's like, okay, I need to talk about it more. So then what we discovered is I would bring it up at night, you know, in somewhere around bedtime. I'd be like, hey, we haven't talked about intimacy in a long time. Do you want to talk about it? And then I would see her like freeze up, or she'd get instantaneously frustrated and mad at me. And what we discovered was me bringing it up at that time was a trigger. Right. So she got better at saying, EJ, this is just not a good time to talk about this. I appreciate your willingness to bring this up, but could we talk about it some other time? I also had the ability then to recognize like, okay, like I don't want to trigger Tara. I want her to feel safe about this in this conversation. So I could, you know, maybe Saturday morning, I could say, hey, I know we haven't checked in about intimacy lately. If there's a time this weekend where you feel really safe and you feel like you're ready to have this conversation, let me know, because I'm really open to us talking about it. You know, that I think was a huge thing, was really finding a way to know when the right time and when and where, you know, the setting as well was important. Not in the bedroom. That wasn't a good setting for it either.
At night when sex usually happens. So I love that you said that, because for listeners out there, we have a system now, and we developed the system from all of our mistakes and failed attempts. And so it's going to feel, if you are kind of in this situation and struggling, it's going to feel clunky, you know, but if you're both intentional and keep trying at it, like you will find a system that works for you. And that's when you're in the process that feels really good. And it just took us some tweaks to get there, but right, we were willing to be brave and take the emotional risk of like being honest with ourselves and each other, because we know that's when we'll have our best relationship.
Yeah, I love that. Talking about emotional risk, because I think some people have this like internalized like fear or reluctance to be vulnerable or bring something up. And I hadn't thought about it as, you know, that translating to them as an emotional risk. Like I've always been I'm almost like too communicative, like a bit of an oversharer. Like I'll really like, I have experienced that feeling of being a bit afraid of bringing something up for fear of how the other person will respond. But it's a compulsion. Like I can't help but do it anyway. So it hasn't sort of felt to me like an emotional risk, because it's been my like default state. And through working with so many people over the years and talking to people about this communication piece, I've realized that that's not common, that the way I operate is actually really not common, and I can't expect the same from other people. And so I have to, be very aware that it can feel like a huge risk. It can feel really vulnerable and really scary. So I think like my next kind of line of questioning or thing that I want to focus on is around ways to create connection and intimacy and safety that aren't necessarily sexual and aren't putting pressure on the actual, penis in vagina, like what we think of as like quote unquote sex. So like, why is it really important to build intimacy beyond sex in relationships? Like how can, actions like learning about our partner's love language and maybe using words of affirmation or surprising them with gifts or doing thoughtful little acts of service or, engaging in affection and non-sexual touch where there's zero pressure that it's going to escalate. How can this kind of deepen connection and therefore have a positive effect on, solidifying that foundation of trust and emotional safety that will, long term result in a more conducive container for sex to happen? Excuse this quick interruption. I'm shamelessly seeking reviews and 5-star ratings for the potty because, as I'm sure you've noticed by now, it's pretty fab. And the more people who get to hear it, the more people I can help with it. Reviews and ratings actually do make a big difference to this little independent podcaster. And it's really easy to just quickly show your support by taking that simple act of either leaving 5 stars for the show on Spotify or even better, writing a written review and leaving 5 stars over on Apple Podcasts. Or if you're a real overachiever, you can do them both. That would be mad. If you're writing a review, though, just be sure to use G-rated words because despite the fact that this is a podcast about sexuality, words like sex can be censored and your review won't make it through the gates. Lame. Anyway, I would personally recommend doing that right now while you remember, just to get on top of it and let me know you're with me on this journey. Thanks, gang. Enjoy the rest of the epi.
Well, I mean, what jumps out to me is, and we're talking about here pretty much exclusively in monogamous relationship, right? Within the context of monogamous relationship, there's an implicit agreement that I will give and receive love in sort of a unique way with you as compared to everyone else in the world. And so if there's one aspect of your relationship that in the past really made both of you feel loved and connected, then you have to put some energy into other areas, sort of bolstering, making up for what is not connecting. Right. And so, I need to know, like, literally, and this comes from a guy, Dr. Stan Tatkin, who we've interviewed a few times, and he's just an amazingly intelligent and compassionate healer, therapist. Is that like there is an existential, like it literally is in my utmost need to survive on this planet to feel loved and to love Tara. Like it is like everything else in our life is much better when we feel loved and loving towards one another. Our jobs are easier. Our finances are manageable. Raising kids is easier. Like everything is better if we're loving one another. And so that makes it an imperative, right? That if we're not connecting in one way, like I have to, when Tara says like non-sexual affection is important to me, I need to know that if there is touch, it's not attached to sex. I need those words of affirmation. I need those notes that you write by the coffee pot every morning to be there. It is my responsibility to do those things, to let her know that she is loved. And conversely, it's the same, that like if we're not touching in a sexual way. And this is our like kind of goofy thing that like her, you know, plucking my eyebrows and, you know,
I groom him.
yeah, her doing those like little things like,
I'm his like little monkey.
I'm not letting anybody else in this world do that. Nobody else is, you know, gets that close to my face, you know? And so when she does that, like it's like, well, she cares. She loves me. I'm special. Like we need that.
Well, and I think it's because we talked about this the other day on another podcast. Like when we are habituated with someone, that means we just get used to them. Our brain conserves energy for like new things and to be, so we start to take this person for granted and like we just kind of lose interest. So one of the biggest things is like just be curious about with each other all the time, every day, because every moment is different. Like what, even the question is like, how was your day today? Did you learn anything new? Like we don't ask each other those questions yet. People still want to have this really awesome sex life, but then this other part of you has like not been paid attention to in so long because it's a biological thing that our brain does. We conserve energy and this person, we know this person. I'm like, well, I don't need to like be curious about them anymore because I know everything. I mean, that's the thing, curiosity, like just checking in every single day about each other.
Well, being curious about what makes you feel loved. You know, I think that's something that changes, you know, and that evolves as well, you know, because I think like I used to not like gifts weren't that important. Like I really didn't. I just never. I don't know. I just didn't really care. And then there was something like Tara's just. She can be a very thoughtful gift giver. Like when she buys me something, like it's cool. Like she got this new brand of like clothing that she just started buying me. That's like super soft and it's like and it looks cool and it's just like and it's just. And I think she like, I remember like a few years ago, she just noticed that I was sort of shifting in that way and she was adaptive to it. And it just makes me feel special that she's curious. She's paying attention. She's noticing how I'm shifting and changing and she's adapting to that, you know, and hopefully she feels the same way that like, because that feels like love that somebody cares enough to pay attention and to be responsive to your needs.
Yeah.
I'll say this too, because this is a different kind of tool that we help, especially if there are couples who are listening where there's just like a ton of anxiety or tension around sex and intimacy. It's like, okay, so a safety container, and I'll explain that because I've worked with a lot of couples where mistrust has happened, infidelity has happened. We work with a ton of infidelity, and it's like people still have sex, yet their entire body is closed off and they're in a dissociated state. And I'm like, okay, we can't do that. Okay, so what we start with is like, okay, how about when you guys get home, right? Like, let's just say like the partner, like let's say the male partner comes and like, just like, you know, grabs his partner's booty. All of a sudden she's like, oh my God, I know what this means. Oh my God, I just got to get dinner ready and da-da-da. No, it's like the safety container is like, hey honey, I love coming home. I love looking at your booty. I'm going to grab it, but that is it. There's no expectation of anything. Is it okay if I still do that? So you're just putting these like little limits. Like we're going to French kiss for however long, but that is it. It's not going to go to sex. Like it feels safe. Then you're not getting spun out in the person who might have more anxiety. Like, okay, we're just kissing. I mean, a big thing with us is like, EJ, if you're going to give me a massage, like for me, because massage is always like, oh, he's massaging me. That means it's going to end in sex. Like sometimes I just want a massage. Sometimes the massage does end up like where my frisky scale goes up. Great. But like, I don't want that to be the expectation. And so we set a safety container on, like, if you're massaging me, can it just be a massage? Because I really don't want to have that. And he's absolutely. So then I'm not in my mind like, oh God, what if it doesn't go up? What if my frisky scale doesn't go up? But he's massaging me and usually it ends in, right? It's like so overwhelming. And what my supporting role is to like, I don't want sex or emotional intimacy, physical intimacy to be associated with something that feels threatening, because it's just a part of who we are. And so the safer we can make it and more natural that we can make it, like just the Labia Lounge podcast. Like, yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah.
There shouldn't be any like, oh my God, you're on the Labia Lounge. You can hear people's anxiety around it. Like, it says labia. Like it's all good. Like by just you're making it like that's a cloud. This is sex. This is orange. But our bodies start to register a lot of this anxiety with it. So
Totally. Yeah, it's so common, hey, where I mean that's one of the biggest things that I'll recommend couples do is like, all right, why don't we even for a while just strip it back to basics and take sex off the table entirely so that you can experience what it's like to enjoy a massage or enjoy a makeout session or like explore physical intimacy and even pleasure, even erotic pleasure without the expectation or pressure of it being a foregone conclusion that this will result in sex. It's so amazing for desire, actually, if you remove any pressure to have desire in the first place, And yeah, what you were saying about curiosity being such a big piece is massive. And that's something that I think everyone could benefit from with regards to any kind of communication or challenge or, just how can we meet challenges with creativity and curiosity instead of reactivity, which is often most of our default, especially with crunchy or challenging topics that are stressful or awkward or uncomfortable for us. So I love that you mentioned that. And I want to chat a little bit about like this concept of transitioning, because I think it goes a bit, I guess a lot of people don't even really think about it. And then when you explain it to them, they're like, oh my God, of course. But so often I'm talking about, like I'm explaining to people about their parasympathetic nervous system's role in arousal, for instance, and how context is really important. And we all have, brakes and accelerators in our sexual desire and our arousal response. And so, getting them to understand that going from a really stressful day at work or just putting the kids to bed and you're exhausted, you've got cortisol and adrenaline coursing through your veins just from like the stresses of day-to-day life, or perhaps even more, additional stresses that aren't normally there. And for most people, sometimes some people that activates their turn on, but for most people, to get from that space and just be expected to like hop into bed at the end of the day, a stressful day when you're knackered, and just immediately flip a switch and be in a space of like turn on and desire and be ready to have sex is just ridiculous. Like that is so unrealistic if you understand how the body and our arousal processes actually work. And so, there's all this whole thing people talk about, foreplay being a 24/7 thing and, kind of creating a conducive kind of environment and the conditions to allow us to transition into a space of desire more easily. But I'd love you guys to talk about some strategies for that transition period. Like what can people do to go from stressed and not turned on to at least being in a receptive enough space that their responsive desire has a chance to kind of start engaging and responding. Without putting any pressure or expectation on it,
I mean, for us and what we promote with other couples, it really comes down to dedicated together time. It comes down to making space for just the two of you. And I think like, even though, we certainly have had our struggles maybe to do romantic or, romantic date night, or we've definitely had our struggles around physical intimacy. We very consistently have made time just to go out in the backyard, go out into a space that we've created together and ask each other questions and take 45 minutes, even though there's a sleepover and 6 kids are yelling and screaming. I just think, talk about the transition to like eventually maybe connecting more deeply, more sexually, more emotionally, just by creating some time every week where it's just the two of you, where you're actually like checking in. How are you feeling? What's going on for you? What are you struggling with? Maybe asking some curious questions out of a book or whatever that get you into some funny or interesting or slightly, erotic areas. But to me, that you just have to keep that alive.
It's systems. It's when you have systems and you build them and now they become automatic, it starts to feel good. Like I know every weekend, regardless of how jam-packed our weekends are, that EJ and I are going to make time for the two of us. Like, so I can look forward to that. So then it doesn't build up like those nights where it's just like, we just know during the week, like, well, it's not happening, but we're going to have some really good time. But most couples don't have systems set up like that. And then the idea of like scheduled time together, well, guess what? If you don't do it, it's not going to happen. And so it's like, this is why in our in-office and at-home program, or really couples come in, they're 75 minutes long, but we have all these at-home lessons and they have to sign a contract in their first session. We are going to take this day, this time, and we are going to do these lessons. And it's not really about the lessons. The lessons are great. They, promote curiosity, but it's like, you guys have to start setting out time outside of here just for your relationship. And the idea is that when they're finished with us, then now it's been 4 months, 6 months, whatever. Now they've got that new behavior. They're in the habit. Absolutely. And then one thing I was going to say, hang on, menopause break thing here, is like recognizing. So EJ runs a boys camp over the summer. And so basically he's been doing it for 16 years. So we go to Maine over the summer. And when I go to Maine, I leave our Tucson business. My kids are at camp, right? They're functioning at camp. So we have the camp food lodge place. So they do laundry. So I basically have this cabin on a lake in Maine, and my responsibilities go from like insane to nothing. We have sex almost every single night. I'm like, I love Maine. I love Maine. So, because at first I'm thinking, oh, it's just because I'm so overwhelmed or we're disconnected. Well, one of the biggest stark differences is like this couples will come in, oh, we have great sex on vacation. It's like when your brain has the ability to breathe and function and have space, that's when my arousal, but it's not reality. Like I wish I could just be at camp all the time, every day. It's not reality. It's like, bam, you come back to Tucson and it's like, go, go, go from 5 a.m. to 10 at night. But you know what? We got our summers, babe. It's like that idea of like, we only have so much space and we're so good now at cramming our brain with so much information that it truly does cover up that part of us that just has that arousal piece. And so realistically, right, I can't be in Maine every day. And so we set up our systems and we know that on Saturday or Sunday or whenever it is, that we'll have our time. It'll feel really good and that we can kind of get through the week. It's like a trust.
Yeah. I think like just being committed and being equally invested in carving out that time together is so essential. And it's just kind of ridiculous and outdated that people think it should just be spontaneous and not require any effort or planning or, intention. But what you were sort of saying about, when you removed a lot of the stresses, how your desire had some space to actually like flourish. I think there's so much advice around how to spice things up and like, add in a toy or some role play or add in these things in the efforts to try to like stimulate your sexual accelerator and like ramp it up. But the research actually shows that like adding stimulation or intensity or novelty to kind of pump up the sexual accelerator or like increase your libido is only like very occasionally like
Effective.
actually what's needed and effective. You know, like more commonly it's we need to eliminate or minimize the things that are hitting our sexual brakes and are like dampening or stifling or suffocating or blocking our desire. So when you're describing, you know, and that is generally more the reason why people have great holiday sex and more sex and more satisfying sex on holiday. Like, sure, there's more novelty and it's a new environment and that does ramp things up, but it's probably more because it's removing the daily chores and the to-do list and all of the stresses around work and childcare and, you know, so I think that's such an important thing to note when we're talking about like, okay, how do we make the transition from day-to-day stress into sexy mood time? How do we make that happen more easily? And it's often removing the things that are like getting in the way.
Yeah. And when couples start checking in every day, it's like it feels better because it is more difficult to feel alone in a relationship than to just be alone and single. It's just way more taxing on our emotional system. So like when couples even just start talking about it, like you'll see, like we call it the honeymoon period of therapy. Like even though couples have been in this god awful place for years, they're like, oh, we're here somewhere. We have help. Like there's this like immediate like, okay, we're going to be okay. Like, I mean, then, you know, we start getting into the stuff and then there's a messy middle, but it's all good because, hey, but yeah, it's just like, you know, the talking about it piece. It's like, you're not alone in it anymore. You're going to have help. We're going to be a team. Like you said, got a partner in crime here. We can tackle this together.
Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful. I'm wondering like what your kind of, if you're a bit more up to date than me, I know there's like a study, but it's from 1996 that was around like women's sexual desire being more driven by interpersonal and relational kind of factors, like, you know, love and intimacy and that more emotional side of things, compared with men. So like meaning, you know, women's sexual satisfaction and desire levels are very affected by things like relationship difficulties and not feeling as emotionally connected and stuff compared to men. I don't know what, like if you're aware of more current research, but is this true in your experience?
I mean, I can't speak to research. I'll be honest with you around that, but I think anecdotally, that's what we see. I mean, that it's so much more, you know, language based and connection based, and the whole emotional safety. That is what an extremely high percentage of women that are in heterosexual relationships that we've worked with, it comes down to that. And the men are just less tuned into that. And then so oftentimes what the process that we take men through, and I've worked a lot individually with men as well around this, is understanding the utility of identifying what you're feeling, finding the words that describe it, and then communicating it in a hearable way. Even the difficult things, in fact, sometimes especially the difficult things, is that they've become very shut off from their emotions, which is exactly what their partner is wanting. They want it, the partner is going through stuff, is having a big emotional experience. And they have a partner who's just completely cut themselves off, has found ways to use, you know, escape through medicators, through looking at their phone, whatever, to completely deny that they're having feelings. And so, yes, anecdotally, what we see is women want a social connection, you know, with their partner.
Yeah.
And the biggest thing is like, I think this is true for both male and female, but like, we all want to be wanted. Like, I want to help EJ. He supports me in my emotions. I want to support him in his, but it's like the shame around it or a judgment around it. It's just like when EJ's struggling, like I feel so empowered that I get to like help him and support him. But he was right, an avoider of emotions. Like it took years and to help him understand, like, you're not just a Buddha, honey. You got some compartmentalization happening. But now that like when he struggles, I get to be there for him. It's just, again, going back to the emotional risk. You've got to trust that your partner can handle it. And so many times, and this is huge, I could tell, I can't even remember what podcast this was, but I could tell that like she had a stressful day. So like, I don't want to put any more on her plate. So I'm just going to keep this to myself. Well, what does that actually say? That means I actually trust that I don't trust that my partner can handle it because they're too overwhelmed. So I'm going to keep it to myself. And then that causes problems because then it comes out later in like a volcanic eruption. And it's like, well, I had no idea that was happening. Well, you are always too overwhelmed. But give me the benefit of the doubt that I can handle it. Like a lot of people don't give each other the benefit of the doubt. Like, oh, they won't be able to handle sex talk. They're too overwhelmed. They don't even want to do that. It's like, okay, well then now you're saying that you mistrust your partner. And it's not even conscious. It's so unconscious, but it's like not fair. We don't give each other fair treatment. Like I've got to at least be like, EJ, we have to talk about this. It's really important. And I have to trust that he can handle it. And if he can't, well, at least I tried and I didn't keep it in. And
oh, totally. Like you've got to have like a level of self-responsibility and I guess it's quite disempowering when we're making decisions on behalf of our partner because we don't think that they can, they can hack it. And so then we're managing their emotions and we're becoming, that's a lot to kind of hold and manage, which means we have to put our own, emotions aside potentially. And it's, a bit of a recipe for disaster. But what you were saying about, emotional intimacy and communication, creating safety and that being very present for women's desire. Like I've sort of noticed also pretty anecdotally, often the emotional side of things for women is like their gateway into arousal and enjoying sex. And they like to connect first and then they feel open to having sex. Whereas a lot of the time for men, it feels like since they're conditioned to not talk about their feelings as much and not be as in touch with that, their way of feeling connected is having sex. So they have sex to feel connected, whereas women often feel connected to have sex. And one kind of last thing before I just quickly get a TMI story out of you guys. I'm just curious, and maybe you don't have much to say on this, but I'm curious, like, does masturbation and having a solo pleasure practice and a kind of solo relationship with your body and your sexuality help? Is that something that you also sort of coach your clients around when it comes to this stuff, or is it not really in your wheelhouse?
Hey, me again. If you'd like to support the potty and you've already given it 5 stars on whatever platform you're listening on, I want to mention that you can buy some really dope merch from the website and get yourself a Labia Lounge tote, tee, togs. Yep, you heard that right. I even have Labia Lounge bathers. Or a cute fanny pack if that'd blow your hair back. So if fashion isn't your passion though, you can donate to my Buy Me a Coffee donation page, which is actually called Buy Me a Soy Chai Latte, because I'll be the first to admit I'm a bit of a Melbourne cafe tosser like that. And yes, that is my coffee order. You can do a once-off donation or an ongoing membership and sponsor me for as little as 3 fat ones a month. And I also offer one-on-one coaching and online courses that'll help you level up your sex life and relationship with yourself and others in a really big way. So every bit helps because it ain't cheap to put out a sweet podcast into the world every week out of my own pocket. So I will be undyingly grateful if you support me and my biz financially in any of these ways. And if you like, I'll even give you a mental BJ with my mind from the lounge itself. Saucy. And I'll pop the links in the show notes. Thank you. Later.
No, constantly like, because so many people don't even know what touch they like, let alone touch their own bodies, because whether it was religious beliefs, religious shaming, parents just like catching you in the act like, and screaming and your body's like, oh God, that was so bad. I mean, I've also worked with like a lot of adolescents where parents will bring them in, like, please get my child to stop masturbating. I'm like, oh, I am not the therapist for you.
Oof.
So yes, we explore that once it feels like the couple is in a place that it feels safe with, right? And they can talk about these things and they can start to open up about their own desires and fantasies. It's so important to be able to,
Yeah.
and a lot of times people don't even know, but like seeing their partner masturbate is like a huge turn on. But because there's such a shame stigma attached to it, like they don't even talk about that. So people are watching porn like behind each other's back and like, well, is it because I'm boring? Well, no, it's none of that. It's because you guys just haven't really talked about it together or even thought about it yourself. And so one of the biggest things that we do with our like intimacy pieces, we're really like evaluating and assessing our own body image, how our own insecurities might be projected into this intimacy. How can we feel better about our own bodies, our own pleasure, accept it, get out of the old story that was super rigid, be way more open. And then that also gives us the chance to explore with our partner the openness once that feels more open. So we're kind of looking at it like a lot of the couples work we do is like individual work for the sake of the couple.
Yeah.
But there are some couples that are like, listen, we don't want to go there. This is more private. We'll do all of our little intimacy questions outside of this session. And we honor that too. Absolutely. But we say it's still important.
Yeah, so important, and something that irks me that I hear way too much still is, when couples think that if they're self-pleasuring without their partner, that is, especially if there's a sort of desire discrepancy, you know, it feels like they're taking sexual energy or time or effort away from something that they could be sharing with their partner, and it's detracting from, if they're getting it themselves, then why would they need their partner? And so there can often be jealousy or insecurity or like just misunderstanding around that and the role that that can play. But I'm always encouraging people to develop their own solo pleasure practice and have a relationship with their body outside of their sexual dynamic with their partner, because that, generally feeds and bolsters and creates a more robust kind of relationship with sexual desire and pleasure and their bodies. So I think it can be a really beautiful tool to like help things rather than hinder them. And it's a shame when people see masturbating, like I hear it too much where people are like, oh, I ask them about their masturbation practices and they're like, oh, I just don't, like, I mean, I'm married, like I don't need to, I've got a partner for that, and I don't want to waste my sexual energy on a solo thing when like he already feels like he's not getting enough sex, so I may as well just save it for the bedroom. And I'm like, oh God.
Yeah. No, I know. I don't know. It's like something just happens. Some story happens. Like you get married, you have kids, and like it's just all so distorted. It's all so distorted. So it's like coming back and like, let's not let this be heavy too. Life's heavy enough, man. Let's get some pleasure. But the number one feeling we forebode is joy and pleasure. It's the one feeling out of all of the feelings, shame, depression, it's the one feeling we don't want to feel too much of because of what's on the other side. So I can't feel too much of this. So we make up these stories.
Yeah. What's crazy.
So
hey?
yeah, no, I'm a total like masturbation, like let's talk. And I think people love it because I get so excited. They're like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
It's like when couples go in the messy middle and they don't want to come back. I'm like, it's happening. A shift is happening. That means if you don't want to come back to me, that is like a change is happening. You've got to come back. It's only going to last 2 weeks. And they just see how much I believe in it because it's so true. Because once things start changing, right, this is important. It's scary. Even if it's dysfunctional, it's still like, right, homeostasis. Couples will start to shift when they do this work, and unconsciously it's like, no, let's just go back to the system. What was it? We're totally good. But no, we're not good. And so it's like, wait for it because you'll start to shift. Dynamics will feel more open, and there'll be this little piece unconsciously that's like, we're going to go back. But don't like wait for it and then move forward because you want that new story. You don't want to stick in that old rigid story where you were limiting yourself and each other and your family and life in general. Okay, I'll stop talking now. Let's
It's
get
not
to
a
some
quick fix,
TMI.
is it? Yeah, I'm conscious of time. I've got plenty, but you guys probably have to get going. It's evening where you are, and you've got some twins to parent. But I would love to hear a TMI story from either or both of you if you feel like sharing.
TMI, we love it. TMI, we love it.
Okay, so TMI is just like what I don't even know if you know this. Can it be a TMI that EJ doesn't know?
Wow.
That would be ideal. How good.
Yeah,
Oh
this
my
is
God.
intimate.
Real-time reaction.
Oh my God, I can't believe it. Okay. So the idea of squirting is like amazing to me, and it's never happened. And so like a couple weeks ago, I think I sent you like maybe a video, but I literally spent like 2 hours trying to do all the different things on myself. To get like,
You did not send me a video about this.
I think I did, but you were at a basketball. You were at a basketball game with your parents, and you said, "I can't open that now. I will show you through my text messaging. It doesn't matter." But I spent a couple hours trying to squirt. It didn't happen. It's okay. It was definitely, but I was like, it was really fun.
I'm just curious, like, what opened the door to this, like, idea in mid-afternoon while I was at a basketball game?
Because I never have time alone without children or you.
And there was a space for squirting.
And I think because my body's changing, like I just want to make sure I can still like touch and feel the touch, like it's not going to be numb. And then I was like, well, I want to see, I just explored, I Googled it, like ways on YouTube videos, but it didn't work. I was kind of
got
bummed.
a podcast episode about squirting as well, so maybe check that out.
I'm going to check that out. It didn't work, but it felt really good. And I was going to be like, oh, yeah. So that's my TMI story.
Wow, that's great. I love to learn something new about you, Tara. Who knew?
Good on you. What you got, AJ?
You got to follow that up, babe.
Oh, my gosh.
No, I'm kidding. No pressure.
I mean, the only one that like jumps out to me, we had talked about a little bit before, is one time early on in our relationship, we were having sex and suddenly Tara had this like what we thought was like a contraction.
He sent me into contraction.
Like a uteral contraction, and she thought she was dying. So we both were like, we started freaking out. Yeah. And then Tara was like, take me to Walmart. We got to go find something to help with this. And so we got in the car. She's like crying and yelling. And we drove to Walmart, and it was like 10 at night and Walmart wasn't open. So we just sat in the parking lot of Walmart for a half an hour until finally it stopped.
I've never had contractions from sex before.
This was prior to
painful? Like not like
it was horrible. Like I almost went to the ER.
Like cramps. Oh, okay.
Yeah. We didn't go to the ER. We went to Walmart instead.
Because we didn't know.
We didn't know where to go. A couple of grown adults who've taken sexuality courses in college and grad school went to Walmart.
To try to see if there was an over-the-counter medication for, I don't know, or was it orgasm spasm cramps? I don't know. I really don't. Yeah. I used to be like, TMI. There was a time where I used to be very highly orgasmic, but like at least 12 orgasms in one.
Wow.
Yeah. I know. Maybe that's what it was. Just too many.
Back in the day.
Back in the day, honey.
Good old days.
Good old days.
Oh, wow. All right. Well, amazing. Those were great TMIs. Thank you so much. This has been, such a dream chatting with you guys. # couples goals, eat your heart out. Like, love what you guys are about and what you're doing with your podcast and your work, and, helping other couples through sharing vulnerably about your own journey. And, I love when I see other practitioners that are like, we're not perfect. This shit's hard. We're figuring it out as we go, and we're letting you in on that journey, and you can learn alongside us. Like, that is so valuable and courageous, I find. So go you.
Thank you. That's been our sort of mission from the beginning, is keeping it real, being who we are, and knowing that has a lot of power in it.
Yeah. Yeah. Big
And
time.
thank you for all of your work, just destigmatizing all of the shame around like our bodies and sex and orgasms. I'm definitely going to listen to more of your podcast for sure, but I love that work. It's so important. So important.
Thank you, my love. Amazing. Well, I'll put links to your podcast and all of your work in the show notes. And I'll leave you to get on with the rest of your evening.
Well, thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure.
Yeah, we might, if it's okay, like have you on our podcast to talk about something juicy. That would be amazing. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. It was so nice to meet you, and we'll for sure be in touch.
And that's it, darling hearts. Thanks for stopping by the Labia Lounge. Your bum groove in the couch will be right where you left it, just waiting for you to sink back in for some more double L action next time. If you'd be a dear and subscribe, share this episode, or leave a review on iTunes, then you can pat yourself on the snatch, because that's a downright act of sex-positive feminist activism, and you'd be supporting my vision to educate, empower, demystify, and destigmatize with this here podcast. I'm also always open to feedback, topic ideas that you'd love to hear covered, questions or guest suggestions, so feel free to get in touch via my website or over on Insta. You can also send me in TMI stories to be shared anonymously on the pod. My handle is FreyaGraff_the Labia Lounge, if my account hasn't been deleted for being too sex positive, which, is always a possibility with censorship. But just in case the chronic censorship finally does obliterate my social channels, I'd highly recommend going and joining my mailing list and snagging yourself some fun freebies for the trouble at www.freyagraff.com/freebies. Anyway, later, labial legends. See you next time.